'67 Mercury Cougar. It's a standard model. It was bought in October of 1987. It was originally purchased by my ex-wife. At the time, I had a '66 GTO, and she wanted to have a hot rod too. And somehow the GTO went, and all the other cars that I've had through the years went, and somehow this car stayed around. I think it's because it was the nicest of the ones that we had. This was an Arizona car originally. There was no rust on it anywhere when we bought it. But it had some drivetrain issues, and we had changed engines, and the transmission went out of it a couple months after she bought it. And it spent most of its time torn down, more than it ever did get driven. We drove it for a couple of years, and I kind of took over on starting to restore it. It was completely torn apart and sitting up on blocks in our backyard, and we got divorced. And she conceded to let me take the car, pretty much, I think, because there's nothing she could have done with it at that point anyway. It was completely needing rebuilt at that point. But it was bought in '87. It took me 12 years to restore this car, between being divorced and raising a family and losing jobs and not having money, and I just pecked away at it summer after summer. I think it's been finished now for probably pretty close to 10 years.
Where did you start?
When I lived with my ex-wife, we lived down in the woods, and it was sort of like this, and it was really damp. One day I went down and I opened up the driver's side door, and there was mushrooms growing on the carpet on the front floor. And I'm like, okay, we're in trouble here. The carpet was completely soaked. The front floor had rusted out on it just from sitting down in that damp area. And it hadn't run, and we didn't have any money to put into it at the time. So I'm like, you know what, I got to get this interior out of this thing and dry it out. And the suspension was shot on it. The brakes were shot on it. It just basically needed everything. In my mind, I had gone to tech school for body work. I was working in a body shop for a while, and I knew how to do the stuff on it. But I had no garage or anything. We had a patio in the backyard. I had it up on cement blocks, and I just started tearing the car apart. And I started actually in the back window area. The vinyl top was all blown up because it was starting to rust out around the back window. That's where I actually started. I took the top off, I took the back glass out, and I started welding back there and fixing all that area, and that's kind of where it started. And then the car had undercoating on it from the factory, and half of it was on, half of it was off, so I started scraping and cleaning all that. I had the whole suspension off, so it was completely torn apart. One thing led to another, and then I figured out why the front floor was rotted out on it. Is these Mustangs and Cougars are notorious for the cowl vents rotting out up under that cowl. Well, that doesn't unbolt on there. There's probably about 200 spot welds that hold that on the car.
Wow.
So you got to take the windshield out, fenders off, and you got to draw out all the spot welds to get that off. And then once you're inside there, there's these things, they call them like top hats, and it's basically like an 8-inch pipe that comes up, and that's your vent that goes down in. Well, they rust out around the bottom, and then all the water just runs right down in the car. I knew I was neck deep in it at that point when I had to start tearing it apart.
Can you see that from under the hood, from
No,
inside?
you can't.
So it's hidden.
It's hidden. You don't really know there's a problem until
Gotcha.
your floor starts to get wet or it starts dripping out your vent. It's a very common problem on these cars, and really that's the only way to fix it properly is to get in there and do that. And these cars were never, let's face it, they weren't designed to last 50 years. They planned on them being off the road probably within 5 years, so they didn't do any corrosion protection back in the 60s. That was all unpainted under there. And that's where all your weather goes, and that's where all your pine needles go, and all your leaves get stuck in there, and then it just lays in there, and the moisture stays, and
you get mushrooms.
You get mushrooms. Yeah, when you get mushrooms and moss. I'll never forget it.
So if anybody needs to grow mushrooms,
they
just
let your car
find an old Cougar and
park it down in the
Perfect.
woods next to a stream on grass, and that'll happen.
Why that color? Was that the original color of the car?
The original color was maroon. That is not the original color. I wanted something close to the, thank you. I wanted something close to the original, but more vibrant. And I get more compliments on that color than anything else on the car. Believe it or not, it's a 1997 Toyota color. I had a buddy that had a body shop. I took home some chipbooks one day and I started looking through it, and I found 3 colors that looked exactly the same to my eye. One of them was this color, one was a Ford color, and I forget what the other one was, and I went down to get the paint mixed, and I said I want a gallon of the cheapest one of these 3 because I can't tell the difference. And it turned out it's a Toyota Lexus color called Ruby Pearl. With the chrome, it makes it look like it's a custom mix or something. If you'd see that on a new car, you probably wouldn't look twice at it, but on an older car, it looks like a custom color. It's all original chrome on the car. The front bumper's been replated, the rear one hasn't. That's on my to-do list. All original Ford sheet metal on there. It's a factory quarters trunk lid. I did replace the hood. I had a parts car. That hood's off of a parts car because it was in better shape.
How about interior-wise? How much work's had to be? I know
Interior, it's
mushroom growing is not conducive to good
the interior, it still has the original door panels, still the original upholstery on the back seat. New carpet, new headliner, it's original dash pads. The front seats are actually high back buckets. They were a special option on a 71 XR7 because they actually have the running cat in the backrest of them.
Cool.
The car was originally air conditioned, and I took all that out. It was actually disconnected when we bought it, so I took the ducts and everything out of the dash, and I found another car that didn't have the cutouts for the vents. When I first built this car, I wasn't looking for comfort or air conditioning. This was going to be just a weekend warrior type of thing, and I didn't want air. Well, now I'm older, and I changed the drivetrain in it. I wish that it had air because it is hot in the summer driving this car. You learn from them as you go, and I know what I'll do different next time. The 351 Windsor, 74 block, 70 heads, fully ported. It's mildly built. The engine, the car originally came with a 289 4-barrel, and it was pulled in 1987 because it needed a valve job, and I wanted something more, and we put this 351 Windsor in it way back then. Run around in it, raced it for a little while, had an automatic in it at the time. The car originally was an automatic. Then the car sat and sat and sat. Then when I restored it, I put another 289 back in it that was extremely built up. Really radical cam. I shifted it at 7,500 on the street. It was balanced. It was a hot dog engine, but it was, unless you were flooring it going in a straight line, it was a nightmare to drive. Had no bottom end. It idled real high. It didn't make any power till about 3,400 RPM. Had 411 gears in it at the time. It was a fun straight line car, but driving it around, it was a nightmare. So then I decided I want it to be more drivable, more fun. I didn't want it to run like a race car on the street. I wanted it to run like a muscle car. So that engine it's mildly built. It runs pretty darn good, and it runs like a muscle car now. I took the 411s out. I put 325s in the back. I still kept the top loader 4-speed. I like the 4-speed. It's a pretty fun little car to drive around now. I have competition leaf springs in the back that are lowering springs. They're stiffer, and I have the 1-inch 620-pound coils, 1-inch drop coils in the front. And I also did what they call the Shelby control arm mod on these, where they take the upper control arm and you actually move it up an inch, and it lowers the car some, and it changes the geometry. It gives you all the travel, but it handles so much better. So combined with the Shelby drop and the coil spring drop and the added weight of the Windsor in there over the 289, it gave me about a 2-inch drop up front too. These cars need help. When you look at them, original 67 Cougar, the back sits lower than the front. They're real pedestrian looking. They need some help with their stance. I'm happy with the way it is now. Those are 17-inch Traeger Eliminator wheels. They're throwback. Traeger used to make Eliminators back in the 60s. They used to run them on a lot of the funny cars. You'd see those on the front wheels, and they reissued them a while back. I don't even think they make them anymore. But I like the look, the vintage look, but yet I was real leery. I didn't want to go to a bigger wheel. I'm a fan of the classic look of Traeger SS's and a 15-inch wheel and whatnot. Price of 15-inch tires and the availability of them anymore is not too good, and the handling is so much better.
Yeah. And
the tire selection is so much better. So I wanted to go with a bigger wheel but wouldn't look like I had big wheels on it. I don't think the big 20s look good on these old cars.
A lot of the guys that have German cars and British cars especially are always talking about one of the biggest challenges is just getting the headlights to work because the wiring harnesses and stuff were so bad.
Since you bring up headlights, these cars had vacuum actuated doors on them. Even when they worked halfway. So I actually did a conversion. I put electric motors on there off of a probe, made my own brackets for it. You wouldn't know they weren't factory. I actually got the original sequential taillights working in the back again. Most guys replace that with electronic replacement units that replace it, but there's a gob of wires that there's about 2 inches in diameter that goes into that brain in the back.
It just does
and it just works the turn signal system in it. You can hear the motor running in the trunk when they flash.
Obviously all new top.
Yeah, that's a new top. Did that myself. I was nervous about it. Never did one before. Took a day off of work and nobody was around. I said, leave me alone. And I went down and I did it.
Would you ever get rid of it?
I think so. I mean, I love the car, but I've had it for so long that, if it would finance a better dream, I would probably let it go. I would just hope that somebody from out of state would buy it because I wouldn't want to see it again. I wouldn't want to see somebody else driving it. It would be a very hard decision, just because of the amount of time and the amount of things that I went through in my life to get this car finished, and it actually did get finished. There was a time I didn't think I'd ever get it finished. So there's a lot behind it, more than just the car itself. Can I part with that? More so even than the piece of steel that's in front of me.